Hello there, community. It is Monday, December 4th. We are in December, people. It's, I feel like we were just transitioning to 2023 like yesterday. And here we are, last month of the year. We're about to hit 2024. And I was rolling this at the kickoff, but App World, February 6th through 8th in San Jose, California. Make sure you join us at f5.com/appworld. You can register out there. I will be there, as will, I think, most of the DevCentral team. Boo, Aubrey, and I. Also, Leslie will be there, and I'm hoping we can get Leaf and Rebecca and Tony there as well. But yeah, we're kicking off App World in February, so make sure that you're there for that as well. Join us on DevCentral, community.f5.com. We do a lot here on LinkedIn and YouTube. And I guess we're playing on Twitter as well today. But the rubber meets the road in the community as far as us having an opportunity to interact with each other, ask questions, help each other out. And there are still a few F5 Academy for Big IP Next road shows in this month. I think next week are the last here in the North America leg. So if you're in one of those cities, make sure you get registered for that. Big IP Next is GA as of, I think, October for LTM and for WAF, and more for Access and SSLO and DNS coming in 2024. So make sure you are preparing for that. And to that end, that's what this series is about. We're going. In fact, let me share this out. For the next 3 weeks, we're doing 2 shows a week, Mondays and Thursdays, and we're just kind of diving into AS3 and why AS3. We'll get to what AS3 is here in a minute, but AS3 and then fast on top of that is really kind of the foundation of what's coming with Big IP Next. Most of what you will do beyond ClickOps is going to be AS3 based or fast if you're doing the templatized version of that, and we'll do fast in the new year, but we're going to start with AS3. And so if you haven't started your automation journey with the automation toolchain, that's the audience for these 6 shows. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with just the very basics today of what even is AS3. We're not coding today, so if you're looking for code or whatever, come back on Thursday. And every show beyond that, we'll actually start looking at code. And I'll show an example today. But today is the foundation of the foundations. We're just kind of do a little history lesson, why we arrived at this in the first place, and where we're going from there. That's what today's episode is. And then on Thursday, Ben Novak is going to join me. We're gonna talk about VS Code, the F5 extension, and that part is really important because anything that you're going to do, especially if you're doing your own development in your AS3 declarations or your templates, you can abstract those things with tools like Ansible and Terraform and other tools. But it's helpful to know what those tools that are abstracting things for you are doing under the hood. And so that's he's going to join us on Thursday, and we're going to go through VS Code. And we've done a couple VS Code shows with Ben before. We're actually going to dive into the very specific features and take our time with them, because in episode 3, then we're going to take a traditional big IP configuration, and we're going to explore that in VS Code. We're going to review each of those configurations, and if there's issues that might be present for what applications may not lend themselves well to migrating to AS3, and we'll talk a little bit of why there would be some concerns with that. And so that's what the third show is going to be. Fourth show, we're actually going to get into migrating and deploying applications. And so what does that look like? How do I migrate a config from the traditional big IP configuration files into an AS3 declaration? And so we'll look at that in the fourth show, and then we'll actually deploy that application to a big IP. And we'll talk about in that show too, if you're moving production workloads from a traditional config into an AS3 declaration, what are some of the things that you might consider for that, rather than just like taking new configurations and moving something into production. And maybe you don't. Maybe you say, hey, I'm not really going to do that, and I'll just keep my old configs the way they are, but I'll put all the new applications in AS3. But we'll talk about all that. Fifth show is we're going to create new apps. It's like anytime I'm doing any kind of development, I try and take apart what exists and understand something that already exists, and then tweak it and tune it so that I can start to see how all the pieces work. And then once I have that little comfort level, then okay, let's build something brand new. And so that's what we'll do in the fifth show. And then we'll also look at using shared objects. And so most of what's deployed, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, is bounded into its own tenant. But sometimes you might want to use resources across multiple declarations. And how do we do that in a bounded world? And so that's episode 5. And then episode 6, we'll talk about best practices around AS3. And that's where, we'll talk about what can we do to the system to make it better? What can we do to our own deployments to make them better? And things that we might want to watch out for, gotchas, that kind of thing. And so that's the journey that we're going to take this month. And so again, Monday, Thursday for the duration of the month, minus the week of Christmas and New Year's, where I don't know about y'all, but most of us are not working a whole lot in the last week of December, and so we'll take that week off, and then in the new year we'll get into fast and really start to look at Big IP next, and so I'm excited about that, and so I'm glad you're here, and so let's get started on this journey. And we'll start it with some trivia. And also, if you have any comments, drop them. Any comments, questions, anything, drop it in the chat, and I'll see that, and we can engage in that stuff. If you have anything, that you're going to do for the holiday season, whether Christmas, New Year's, Hanukkah, anything in there that you might be celebrating. What your plans are for this month, what your favorite Christmas food is, or whatever holiday that you're celebrating. One of mine every year is we make fudge, and it's like the old school jet puffed marshmallow jar recipe, And, in this new day and age, they don't even put the recipe on the jar anymore. It's like they give you a URL and then you go out to that URL and you have to hunt for the recipe. Anyway, it's a mess. But anyway, that's one of my favorite is making fudge at Christmas. So first question here is, when was the term API coined? And this was interesting for me because I thought, okay, maybe that was like, sometime in the late 90s or the early 2000s, because, during my career is mostly network and then started to switch to application, at least some level of application support in the early 2000s. But no, that's been around since my birth year, 1974. That's crazy. It was coined in a paper back in 1974. Not that APIs didn't exist before that. They did, but that was when the term was coined. So that was kind of crazy. So I know, right, James? Long time ago. Crazy. Okay. So all right. In what order would you place CGI, GraphQL, JSON RPC, REST, and SOAP in terms of industry adoption of like API standards? The standard data structure type things. And so CGI, not the computer, what is that? Computer graphics interchange. I don't even know what CGI stands for from the standpoint of animation, but not that kind. The kind like I don't know if you had like way old Perl web apps where you had your CGI bin, and that's what we're going for there. But anyway, yeah, the Common Gateway Interface back in the early 90s. And then you had SOAP, late 90s. And I don't know if anybody has used SOAP, but that is very poorly named. It is not a simple object access protocol. That should be a crazy complex. So it would be CCOAP, crazy complex object access protocol, if I were to name that. And then REST, and I didn't know REST stood for representational state transfer, but there you go. And then JSON RPC was somewhere around 2005. REST was very early 2000s. I think there's a paper even, Roy Fielding, somewhere around 2000, coined that. And that obviously took off for a lot of reasons. Mostly, it's very simple. And I remember I was trying to find some emails from, it would have been 2000, even 2008, 2009, because REST was around since 2000, but it really didn't become a part of our product until much later than that. And I remember maybe 2008, sometime 2008, 2010, Josh, welcome, hello, good to see you, or at least see your avatar. And anyway, there was this huge like flame war. Everybody gets excited about what programming language is best, and Perl and Python, and you today like Rust and still Java and C++ and all those. But there was a huge internal flame war between REST and SOAP, and I wanted to find some emails because our distinguished engineer Lori McVitie, which is on the show with me, who was on the show with me last week, and Joe Pruitt, who wrote iControl, they had some pretty fun, heated, friendly, but heated exchanges in email. I was trying to find some of those. But yeah, SOAP and REST, and then JSON RPC, I think like 2005, and then GraphQL from, I think Facebook open sourced that, 2012, 2013. And incidentally, Lori on the show last week said, GraphQL is like one of those, impactful technologies to look out for in 2024. And so, those are kind of the ways of APIs. And, we're still very heavily in REST, at least most of the things that I do. But I'm pushing back on GraphQL. I know I'm going to have to get there, but it's not my favorite. So anyway, one more thing here. What were the pre-marketing names for iControl's Corba and SOAP interfaces? And I don't know if any of you guys have been around that long, but it was Linkit and Xlinkit, and respectively there. So the Corba was Linkit and SOAP was Xlinkit. And also I didn't know this until Joe wrote the article a long time ago, but iControl actually came from a smushed term for internet control. And so anyway, that's trivia. Let's move on to the important stuff. F5 automation history, started with the Linkit, the Corb interface, and that kind of died out. It was deprecated with V9, but Linkit and Corbo kind of were developed almost kind of hand in hand, because as Joe was getting Linkit built, Linkit was like right on his tail. So there's only like 3 months of distinguished time between those two, which when you're talking about product development is pretty impressive. And so, iControl, I think the SOAP version was in for a version 4. I didn't use it then, so I'm not quite sure on that. But certainly 9.0 and forward, SOAP was it for many, many years. And so SOAP is like, based on XML. I don't know if you've used SOAP a lot, the SOAP interface, but when you're writing code against that, you have to have the WSDLs, the web services descriptive language, or whatever that term is. But your code, you have to download those WSDLs, interact with it. But SOAP is very, very, very structured. And so then REST came, and REST is kind of like the, hey, whatever you want to do is fine. It's very flexible, and because it's flexible, that's kind of why it took off. Because I think all of us, by nature, we're fairly lazy. We like to do things easy if we can. And so what you give up in control and structure with SOAP, you have in REST the flexibility in the wild, wild west. And sometimes that shows in all the APIs out there in REST. But REST is a transition away from actually having a data structure to having more about the methods within HTTP, and your get, put, patch, post, or your put, patch, put, get, and delete. And so everything's kind of just run by your state. So it's been super popular. We were EA on Big IP in 11.5, and then fully supported 11.6 forward. So it's been a long time with iControl REST. And then of course we had the iControl LX. So when we bought LineRate way back in the day, we got Node. We started to integrate Node services into Big IP. Excuse me while I take a sip. And so it's a node-based package that is still using REST. We use REST to interact with that package, but it's it's a Node.js package that's sitting on Big IP. We'll get to the architecture here in a minute. And then anyway, v12.1 forward. So if you're on any version that's supported, because even I think 14 goes end of tech support this month, and so I think it's after. When we close the door on 2023, it's v15.1 forward as far as what's supported, right? And so iControl LX is going to be there for you. Is the point? And the other point is, if you have not upgraded from earlier versions and you're out of support or about to be out of support, get to your data centers and or your clouds or wherever your Big IP instances are. And get upgraded. 15.1 is a great version. If you want to get to 17.1, also 17.1 is solid, and so get out there and get upgraded. But part of the iControl LX packages, by the way, you can build your own iControl LX package if you haven't, and so that's a fun exercise. I was working on some zone runner DNS replacement stuff that I was going to try and build a declarative interface for that for myself and just write an article on DevCentral. I could never get the zone freezing and thawing stable enough through an iControl LX package to ever share it with anybody, because it would not have been a safe venture. So back to Xlinkit and the SOAP interface there. Those methods still exist, and you can make your zone runner updates in the SOAP interface today if you need to, but that is not something that is supported through the REST interface. But the packages that we do support within the F5 automation toolchain is declarative onboarding, which allows you to do your day one operations, and it's kind of a single instance declaration. And once you have declared your device with declarative onboarding, that's not something you should go back and redo. And because it's day one only. But AS3, which is what we're going to talk about today, application services, 3.0, and then forward. That is configuration of your virtuals, pools, profiles, application. Please share that, James. Please share that zone runner replacement previous scars from that service. Yeah, so not being able to automate zone runner in REST was one of those things I was trying to handle. But yeah, it was not something that is shareable code at all. I'd probably get slapped on the wrist a lot. Support would not be happy with me if I shared that to the community. But you can, like I said, you can do that through SOAP, and so the zone runner tools. In fact, I'll put in the description later after the show with the zone runner tools that I had through SOAP. I wrote those in Python. And then beyond AS3, we have the telemetry streaming, so you can get your log data to whatever F5 or other tools that you stream your logs to, and so those are the automation toolchain packages that you can install onto Big IP through RPMs, and then interact with them through their REST interface, endpoint. All right, and as I said, AS3, we're going to focus there. All right, so I didn't dot these. That's all right. I'll talk through them. So we're going to talk about, before we get to AS3 specifically, the differences between imperative and declarative models. And so on the left, I don't have a header there, but that is imperative. That is how we do things. Very explicit instructions, defining the control flow and state changes, and ultimately you're telling the system's stupid, you're the smarty pants, right? You know how to do things, and control is yours. I'm more of a control freak around things. I like to know all the steps, and so this is kind of the ClickOps thing, right? It's automating the ClickOps, and so if you've used any of the Postman collections of setting up an entire application with virtual server profiles, SSL profiles, you have to upload certs and all that. To get to that with a advanced WAF policy and a local traffic policy and snap pools and all that, can be like something like 40 or 50, 60 steps in your Postman collection to get to all of that. And so the declarative way tries to solve the amount of ClickOps that you're recreating in an automated way. Advantages though of an imperative model is it's fairly easy to learn, and the machine architecture compliance for that. Disadvantages there, you do need to know the domain specific knowledge. You need to know that a virtual server needs a TCP profile or an SSL profile or the pools and iRules and all those things. But it is a little harder to debug when you have to figure out all the steps, and maybe all those steps can't be done without being in a transaction because they all need to be done at the same time. One of the examples of that is SSL profiles. If you have that applied to a virtual, you can't update the key or the cert independently. They both have to be updated at the same time. But if you're making REST calls to do that in one by one, that's a challenge. So on the imperative side, you would use a transaction, and the REST interface does support that. So you have like mini declaration within the imperative interface. And then moving on to the declarative model here, and it's not so much how to do a thing, it's what you're going to do. And if you've been in any of the AS3 classes at formerly Agility, or in a user group with one of your SEs leading a class on UDF, you may have heard the peanut butter sandwich analogy or the drive-through analogy. When you go to a drive-through, up at the McDonald's, we have like an AI assisted McDonald's here where I live, and And I'm not telling them how to make a cheeseburger or a Big Mac. Maybe I should sometimes, because sometimes they throw stuff together and you're like, but when I'm at the drive-through, I'm just ordering a cheeseburger and a shake and some fries. I'm not telling them how to make it. I'm just telling them what to make. And then I go to the drive-through window and they hand it to me. And so that's more the declarative side. Whereas, the guys who are in the kitchen, they are the ones handling the process of, okay, so I'm making his cheeseburger. It's a McDouble. So I need, my 3 pieces of bread and 2 pieces of bread and the 2 burgers and a piece of cheese and the onions and the pickle and the ketchup. And, he said, don't put mustard on it. So I'm not going to do that. Actually, most of the time they do anyway. But they're going through the imperative steps. So when you're looking at what AS3 does, AS3 on the system side is doing the imperative work for you. All you're doing is saying, hey, here is what I want, and they take care of that. So further on down this list, the declarative model is describing the outcome, or you're describing the outcome rather. You're saying, this is what I want. The system is smart and you don't care is that part, and that's the abstraction level of what a declarative model does for you. So you don't really need to have that domain specific knowledge. The advantages here, it's easier to optimize your code, and it's a high abstraction level if that's a benefit to you. I like to know, I like to be in control, and so it's less of a benefit to me in the initial stages. I want to learn and I want to know what's going on under the hood. Once I know that, it's fine to automate and all that. But so like a day 10, it's great. It's an advantage on day 10. For me, it's the first days, it's not so much an advantage. But one of the disadvantages there, it is less customizable because you're beholden to the declaration, and if there if there isn't support on some of the imperative stuff that you do in the declaration, then it's not supported. You don't get to do that. And so, all right. So, what is AS3? And this is a mouthful, but AS3 is a Node.js based iControl-LX REST extension running on Big IP that implements a declarative model for configuration application services. I think you can run it on Big IQ. There used to be a container that you could run it in, and I don't know if that's still available. But there were options not to have the AS3 package running directly on Big IP, but that's the one that I've always used. But it is, that iControl-LX package. So it's something that needs to be installed. It doesn't come installed by default. You need to install an RPM into Big IP, and then once you do that and it's enabled and running, then the REST listener for that particular endpoint will respond and try and act on that declaration that you're going to send it. And so key features of AS3 is it is agnostic to a Big IP version, and this is something with the imperative commands it isn't necessarily so. If I have something that worked in V13 but didn't work in 17.1, maybe there were some features that were deprecated, or maybe there were some features that were added. If I'm doing my imperative commands, then maybe that config between version 13 and 17 wouldn't work. And so if I try to apply a configuration file in the standard configuration, then it would blow up either one way or the other if I had to roll back or whatever. But the AS3 declaration is such that you provide the details of, here are my IPs, and here are my certs and all that, and then it goes and figures that stuff out for you. It is transactional, so it manages dependencies for you. So anytime you need to do any kind of cert changes and all that's on the system. Remember, the system's smart, and you don't care in a declaration thing, in a declarative model. And then it's idempotent. It's smart enough to know what needs to be done and does only that. So it's not doing all the work every time. And then it's also bounded. All the declared objects are bound to a partition. We kind of talked about that earlier. Everything goes into a tenant. So when you make a declaration for a tenant, then everything you're declaring that will go into on the big IP nomenclature is a partition. And so that's where that goes. There are exceptions where you can do objects in a shared environment, and so those go into common shared folder. So it's not exactly common, whereas your objects would go if you're just building. But it does allow you to share objects across multiple declarations. But most of what your application will be bound to its own partition. But in AS3 nomenclature, that's a tenant. All right. So how does it work? At a high level, you send a declaration, which is JSON data format. So if you're brand new to AS3 or declarative onboarding or telemetry streaming, if you want to do anything with the F5 automation toolchain, JSON needs to be your friend. And so if you don't know JSON, that's something you need to learn. And it's not like you need to like go read a book on it or anything. You just need to get comfortable working with JSON data. And there's JSON validating tools out there. You can have conversion tools. Like if you prefer to work in YAML, you can write things in YAML and have it converted to JSON for you. But JSON is one of those things that you're going to have to learn to get comfortable with. And as we go through this series of 6 episodes, we'll look at JSON data and work with that a lot. So you'll have opportunity to get comfortable. So basically, you make a declaration on your computer or whatever in your automation servers, whatever, and then you send that declaration to the AS3 engine. That AS3 engine will parse that JSON, and then once it goes through the parsing of it, then it will go to an auditing stage. What needs to be done, what can be done, and then it sends that down to big IP from a standpoint of the configuration daemons, and that's at a very high level of what AS3 is doing, and of course this declaration is sent across HTTPS. You'll send it across TLS connection to your big IP, and then that will do all the work in the iControl the node daemons which will work in conjunction with the REST daemons, and then do what it needs to do with MCPD on the configuration side. And so at a deeper level, you can see that your HTTP listener on 443 that you've sent this declaration to, that goes over to REST JavaD, which is listening on 8100. That declaration then heads over to the node process, and it does what it needs to do. Then it's interacting back with the REST JavaD process, and then goes down into the lower level config daemons on big IP. And so that is basically how AS3 works. Before we get out of here, I want to come back to here because we're a little bit over time, but I want to go to the user guides here, and I just want to look real quick at a declaration so that you guys have an idea of what we're looking at. So that's not what I wanted. Here we go. Very basic, and we'll get into this, but this is the JSON declaration, and our class is AS3. We're going to an action here of deploy, and then here's the actual declaration. And so where our class here is our ADC, our application delivery controller. We're talking about the schema version that we're working on, so you do have the ability to do schema validation, and we'll talk about that with Ben on Thursday, because that part's important to make sure that, hey, I'm going to add all these fields in, and maybe those fields work, maybe they don't, and so the schema validation will help with that in VS Code. But you work through here, and so here's your application. This is what you're calling your application, and this is a class tenant, and then we have the service HTTP is the class, and so there's different classes that are defined in the schema, and so this is an HTTP service. Here's how we're declaring our pool. And then, of course, we're calling that, then we actually have to define that, right? And so down here, that's where we define our pool. And of course, that name, that class is going to be a pool. We can attach monitors to that. We can then define members for that, and then apply those. And then if I'm going to do a persistence, in this case, they're going to persist with a JSession ID. So the cookie name here is JSession ID. So that's fairly basic, and in 30 lines of code or whatever, and one push of a button in Postman or a curl statement, you can deploy a whole application into the big IP. So if you haven't done that at all, you can get started before we do on Thursday. But that's you can just put that in the payload in Postman and click post with your credentials, and it should just work. And then you can start to tweak and tune and all of those things. But we'll get back into we'll get into the nitty-gritty details of these. I think we got 2 more shows before. Well, we'll spend a little bit of time on Thursday with Ben, and then Monday we'll kind of go back to just the big IP side of things to try and understand how we migrate and all that before we actually get into migration. But that is, that's the declaration. That's the very basics of where we're going. And so with that, that's what I have for today. We're a little bit over time, but that's okay. Join me Thursday. I think it's 2 p.m. Central for me. That makes it noon Pacific on Thursday. And Ben Novak will be here with me. We're going to get onto the VS Code side of things, get set up and prepped for what we have coming in the rest of the series. So thank you for joining me today. I'm very excited about where we're going to go for the rest of the series. And of course, if you missed the top of the show, make sure you get out there and register for App World. DevCentral team will be there. A lot of your favorite SEs will be there. A lot of our product managers will be there to be able to talk about, they'll be there to field all your questions. And why is the Fritos sticking through? That's interesting. I don't know where that box is. Maybe that's over my shoulder somewhere. Weird. Anyway, fun things. Not quite blurred. I wonder why that's not blurring in the algorithm there. I have a comment here. Absolutely, James. You're welcome. Okay, 2 p.m. Central Time, noon Pacific, Thursday. Meet me back here with Ben Novak. Thanks again, and we'll see you out there in the community.
Well, thanks for checking out that video. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. While you're down there, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. You might want to check out one of these videos over here. And if you haven't already, go check out community.f5.com. This is where all the DevCentral Connects hosts hang out, as well as the rest of the community. It's free to sign up, and we'll see you there.